Amantha Imber is an innovation psychologist, best-selling author and founder of innovation consultancy Inventium. Inventium was recently awarded the BRW Client Choice Award for Best Management Consultancy in Australia. Amantha has a PhD in organisational psychology and has helped companies such as Coca-Cola, Lego, Red Bull, Deloitte, McDonald's, Qantas, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and many, many more. Amantha, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Excellent. I'm on with sound. Awesome. Fantastic. I flew up last night and it was pouring with rain in Melbourne, and then it was pouring with rain in Newcastle when I arrived, so I felt quite at home. So thank you for that. Anyway, here to talk to you about innovation, not the weather. I run an innovation consultancy called Inventium, and we kind of travel around the world helping companies innovate more effectively. But unfortunately, one of the things that I see through my line of work is a lot of examples of really bad innovation, like ideas that should never have seen the light of day. Ideas such as this, for example, the butter stick. Don't want one of them in my fridge. Or this, the boyfriend arm pillow. Don't know what they were thinking there. Or this, the baby mop. Although there are some mums in the room going, not a bad use for my baby. Anyway, these are ideas that should never have seen the light of day, and I want to talk to you about some ways that you can make sure you're never responsible for launching one of these kinds of ideas into the world. So we've heard from some amazing speakers and some amazing stories of highly innovative companies that ranked right at the top of the innovation list last year that we did with BRW. And I think the reasons to innovate are hopefully obvious, but I think for us at Inventium it comes down to two main things, reasons why you'd want to innovate. The first one, which is probably the most obvious one, is to grow. So who's working in an organisation that has growth targets for the next 3 years? One? Yep, most of us. Is anyone aspiring to decline? No? Okay, fantastic, great. So innovation is probably relevant to most of you in the room. The second reason is why you would want to innovate is to not die. Not quite as inspiring, but I mean the world is rife with examples of companies that failed to innovate and are now, either dead or on some serious life support. And I really love this quote from Jack Welch, of course, the ex-chairman and CEO of GE. And he says, "I'm convinced that if the rate of change inside the institution is less than the rate of change outside, the end is in sight. The only question is the timing of the end." And I think, a really interesting question to ask yourself is thinking about the very fast rate of change out there in the world and how fast that is. How fast is the rate of change within your organisation? And if the answer is that the rate of change within your organisation is slower than the rate of change outside, then something needs to happen. Otherwise, the end is in sight. So with innovation, it obviously begs the question, how do you get better at it? And I mean, there are a lot of opinions on innovation. I think there's a lot of fluff in the in the field. A lot of people that sort of think, oh yeah, this worked once, so hopefully it will work again. And for us, what we do at Inventium is we actually like to take a scientific approach to innovation, using methods that have actually been scientifically proven to work. And so science, that's what I'm all about. I'm a massive science geek, which I know, shock horror, here you were thinking, oh, but she looks so cool and hip. No, I'm a massive science geek, have been from a very young age, where when I was about 3 or 4 years old, my absolute hero in the world was the Count from Sesame Street. Remember the Count? I loved the Count. And I loved the Count so much so that I made my mum buy me a cloak and I'd get around town literally dressed as the Count. I then progressed through school, and one of my favourite things to do was to experiment on the family dog Tabby. This is a picture of Tabby. She was a black standard poodle. And this night I'd set up an experiment to see what coloured sheet of paper does Tabby prefer to eat her dinner off at night. And this night it was blue, as you can see there on the slide. But then someone told me that dogs were colourblind, so out went that study. Then went on and did a bit of a life sentence in psychology, studied it for 7 years, ended up doing my PhD in organisational psychology. And do we have anyone in the room that studied psychology? I know, yes, a few people. Yeah, so you guys might recognise this symbol as the shorthand symbol for psychology. Yep, excellent. We're asleep during that lecture. I don't know. Anyway, I look at this now and I think to myself, God, that looks like the devil's pitchfork, doesn't it? But try not to use my knowledge for evil, although having said that, I did work in advertising as a consumer psychologist for a few years, helping people buy more stuff that they didn't necessarily need. But then about 6 years ago, I started this company called Inventium, and we help companies build innovation capability, and also we help them invent new stuff, whether that be new products, services, processes, and so forth. And we do that using a scientifically proven techniques. So we work all around the world with companies such as these ones, and as was mentioned before, we were the co-creators of the BRW Most Innovative Companies list. So something that we started last year with BRW, and we're basically the research partner. We assess all the different entrants on how innovative they are. So let's get on to some different ways that we can increase innovation. The first thing I want to talk about is one of the biggest innovation killers out there, which are assumptions. So whenever we have any kind of a problem or a challenge that we're trying to solve, what will be sitting in the back of our head are a bunch of assumptions, things that we assume to be true. Like, for example, with any problem that we're trying to solve at work, generally there's a budget attached to solving that problem. Like, our budget to solve this problem is, $50,000 or whatever. And that's an example of an assumption. So assumptions can be real or they can also be perceived. But whatever the case, what assumptions do is they basically fence in our thinking. So whenever we have an assumption, it's like this fence goes up in our brain and it says to our brain, your thinking cannot venture beyond this little area. So what we want to do to instantly increase our ability to become more effective innovators is to deliberately identify those assumptions and crush them. Ask, what if the opposite was true? So through deliberately crushing those assumptions, it's like knocking down that fence in our brain and giving our thoughts and ideas permission to wander in all these other areas. So a classic example of assumption crushing is the iPhone. Who's got an iPhone here in the room? What sort of market share does Apple have here? Quite a big market share. And this is a perfect example of assumption crushing in action. If you remember back sort of 10 years ago, back in the days where Nokia was relevant, if you were a mobile phone manufacturer in those days, one of the fundamental assumptions that you would approach creating the next mobile phone with is that a mobile phone has to have 12 buttons on it. Otherwise, how else would you make a call? Apple crushed that really fundamental assumption. They said, well, what if a mobile phone only had one button on it? What could that look like? And through crushing that fundamental assumption, completely changed the interface of mobile phones as we know it. An example closer to home, this is a Melbourne-based business called Repless. And I think, particularly in small to medium businesses, one assumption that we operate by when we're looking at our marketing strategy is that advertising is really expensive. Repless, as a business, really crushed this assumption for all the businesses that it works with, from small through to large, and said, well, what if you could actually, promote your product or service to hundreds, thousands, if not millions of people for nothing. And so the idea behind Repless was actually connecting brands and organisations with what they call social media influencers. So kind of like, people who have really big followings on Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and other social media channels, kind of like, the new celebrity, if you like. And so they connect the brands with the social media influencers, basically for product integration opportunities, like the sort of, modern day product placement, if you like, and all generally just for the cost of some free product or free service. So crushing that fundamental assumption that advertising has to be really, really expensive to reach thousands, if not millions of people. So back in your organisation, to crush assumptions, really two things to do. So firstly, if you can identify, any assumptions that you have, ideally sort of negative or neutral assumptions, like a neutral assumption might be just describing how things are, like a mobile phone has 12 buttons, or a negative one might be, our customer experience is terrible. Identifying that list of assumptions. When we go through this process with clients, we find for any given problem there are, easily 40 or 50 different assumptions attached to most problems. But even if you can identify 4 or 5, that's fantastic. Then what you want to do is ask, what if the opposite was true? So by asking what if the opposite was true is how you can springboard to new types of innovations, like the iPhone, for example, or like Repless, that really challenge and disrupt the way things are at the moment. So crushing assumptions. I want to do one quick thing to lock this in, because I think, you've gotten so much information from this breakfast, and I want to make sure that this stuff sticks. So we're going to do something that might seem a bit weird, but trust me, I'm a psychologist. Okay, so what we're going to do is with your hand, like you're basically just going to pretend that you're crushing something in the palm of your hand. I know it feels like we're back in kinder, but just go with this. And yeah, excellent. Crunching numbers into a phone is not the same as that. And then what we're going to do is on the count of three, we're going to read what's written up on the screen. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Crush assumptions. Fantastic. Awesome. Cool. You can stop doing that. So basically what that's doing, it's giving you 3 times the chance of remembering this stuff, which I think is, good odds for feeling like, a bit of an idiot for a few seconds. So, what we're doing is we're reading it up there. So it's going into a visual memory system. We're saying it out loud. So it's going into an auditory memory system, and we're doing something like with our hands. So it's going into a kinesthetic or muscle memory system. So 3 times the chance, which I think is quite good. And seriously, I'll have people, who've seen me speak years ago coming up and going, I'm still crushing assumptions. Awesome. Cool. Okay, so moving on to the next thing. I love Gary Larson, and I don't know if you can read that caption down the back. It says, wait, listen to me. We don't have to be just sheep. But unfortunately, I reckon what's going on in Australia is that there are a lot of sheep. There are a lot of companies that, have innovation strategies like to be a fast follower. We'll just see what all our competitors are doing, but we'll copy them, but we'll do it really, really quickly. How inspiring is that? And I think that's unfortunate, because I think, one of the things that for us is a given, if you want to be effective at innovation, is to stop being boring. If you look at the work that your business, your organisation is doing, and you think, yeah, it's a little bit dull, you're probably not innovating very well or at all. And when I sort of, look at my own life, someone who really inspired me, who absolutely refused to be boring, was my grandfather on my father's side, Amantha Imber. And my grandfather was from a little town in Poland called Zolochew. And in January 1943, he got the news that his town was about to be invaded by the Nazis. And as a Jew living in Poland during World War II, that's not great news. And my grandfather thought, well, what are we going to do? And I think, the obvious thing that you think there is you think, well, let's just move to another town. But my grandfather thought about that, and he thought, well, if we just go to another town, they'll probably just find us there. So instead, he thought, well, what if we went underground? Maybe they won't find us or look for us there. So for the next 4 months, my grandfather set about building an underground bunker. So it was about 15 metres long, so probably about half the length of this room, I reckon, from there to about there. It was about 2 metres sort of wide, so probably about the diameter of one of the tables that we're all sitting at, and about 2 metres tall, so a fraction taller than me. It's a joke, I'm a short ass, I'm 5'4". Anyway, 2 by 2 by 15 metres. And at the end of that 4-month period, my grandfather and 24 of his closest friends and family went down to live in the bunker. The day after they went down into the bunker was the day the Nazis invaded his town. So bloody good timing. So there they lived for 361 days. Almost one whole year. My grandfather went out twice to get more supplies, but otherwise they were underground this whole time. And on the 361st day, they heard this voice coming from the maze of the sewers, and it was the voice of a British soldier, and he was calling out to them, hello, is there anyone there? The war is over. The war is over. And can you imagine how sweet those words would have sounded after living in a hole for one whole year? So out they all came. They'd survived the war. And what my grandfather found out several months later is that from his little town in Poland, Zolochew, which prior to the war had a population of around 14,000 people, only 50 of them survived. And half of those survivors lived because my grandfather refused to be boring. He refused to play it safe. And through doing that, through having this crazy idea of building this underground bunker and living underground for one whole year, he was responsible for saving half the surviving lives, which I think is quite cool. That's nice. So in your own businesses, have a look at what you're doing. And if you think, yeah, we're a little bit boring, then something has to change. So stop being boring. We'll lock this one down in memory. Sometimes I'll ask audiences like, well, what's this hand gesture that represents that? And a fun one that I got recently was like someone going like that, which I think is quite fun. You do that when you're a kid. So I'll get you to go like that because that's not boring. Awesome. And on the count of three, saying what's up there. 1, 2, 3. Stop being boring. Awesome. Fantastic. I want to talk about one more thing before I get off. So decision making. One of the key things about being an effective innovator is making good decisions. I think too often the focus on innovation is how to come up with great ideas. And yes, that's a challenge, but if you're coming up with great ideas but not making the right decisions about which ideas to progress and which to leave behind, then good ideas are worthless. So decision making. A question for you. When do you make most of your important decisions at work? So just kind of reflect on this really quickly. Are you making most of your big decisions like first thing in the morning? Are you making them, in the afternoon or the evening when you've actually got all your work done? Or are you making your most important decisions just at kind of random times during the day, like whenever you can get the right group of people together to actually make those decisions with you? So many decisions at work are done by a team or by a committee. So we'll just do a quick poll. So who's a first thing in the morning decision maker? Just by show of hands. Okay, cool. Maybe about sort of 15% of the room. Hands down. Who's an end of the day decision maker? One, cool. A few people, 5% of the room. And who's a random times during the day? There's no sort of rhyme or reason or pattern. Cool. So the majority of the room. Okay. So the good news is for about 80% of you, there's a lot of potential to improve your decision making. Okay. Here's how. So. Fascinating area of research called decision fatigue, which has really kind of come to the forefront of cognitive science research. In the last few years, it's gotten quite a lot of publicity as well in kind of, the pop management sort of writings. And decision fatigue is a really interesting concept. What it's all about is that what happens when we go to bed every night after a big day is that essentially our brain sort of restores its cognitive resources, assuming that we have a good night's sleep. We wake up in the morning, we're all fresh, our cognitive resources are full, and then as the day progresses, every single decision that we make chips away at those cognitive resources until by the end of the day, it's kind of declined like that and we're left with not very much. And this is any decision from like what to have for breakfast through to how to allocate budget. Doesn't matter how big or small, every single decision is chipping away at those resources. So if we were to graph it, it looks like that. So basically, the more decisions you make over the course of a day, the worse those decisions become. Exactly like that. So for those that are making decisions at random points during the day, like the majority of the room, you're kind of taking pot luck as to how good the quality of your decisions will be, which is simply not good enough, particularly when it comes to innovation. Those decisions are absolutely critical because that's where you're dedicating a lot of resources to. One of my favourite studies in this area was done with judges where they were looking at over 1,000 different people that were up for parole in front of the judge, and they were looking at whether or not they were granted parole. What they found is that if you were up in front of the judge at about 9 o'clock in the morning, you had about a sort of 85-90% chance of being granted parole, so good odds. If, in contrast, you were up in front of the judge later in the afternoon, like about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, your chances of getting granted parole dropped to about sort of 10 to 20%. It's quite scary, isn't it? Particularly if you're in trouble with the law. You want to do some negotiating with your lawyer. But essentially, decision fatigue leads to us taking the easy way out because, of course, not granting parole is the easy way out. And making decisions about innovation, you cannot afford to be taking the easy way out. Otherwise, you will end up being boring. So, the big takeout here is never, ever, ever make big decisions after lunch because they will not be the best decisions that you can make. So again, we will lock this third and final thing down in memory. So if, who's like a coffee drinker? We all mostly coffee oh, not that many in the room. All right, well, anyway, we'll go with this anyway because, most of us would associate coffee with the morning, which is when good decision-making time is. So we'll pretend to just, be drinking a cup of coffee, regardless of whether you do. I only do decaf. I got off the caffeine a little while ago. This is just me sharing unnecessarily. Okay, so on the count of three, reading what's up there while we drink our coffees, imaginary coffees. 1, 2, 3. Never make big decisions after lunch. Awesome, fantastic, cool. So we've looked at three things. We've looked at crushing assumptions. We've looked at stop being boring, and we've looked at never make those big decisions after lunch. So hopefully three things that you'll remember. But now I want to give you three things to do, just really quickly. That I would love it if you could do. The first thing requires your mobile phone. So grab your mobile phone. And of course, this is if you choose. Obviously, you only have like a limited amount of time to share knowledge at these things. If you would like to learn more things, Christina mentioned a book that I'd written, The Creativity Formula, which will get up on the screen there. So this lovely little book is awesome, but I'm biased because I wrote it. But anyway, what it is, it's 50 scientifically proven ways to boost creativity and innovation in work and in life. So you can get it at bookstores, but if you'd like it for free, just the digital version, give it away for free. All you need to do is just text the word idea to that number, and then I'll personally respond to every one of you. No, I won't, it's all automated. So you just text 0477 765 042, text the word idea, we'll have a little conversation, and then you'll get the whole book for free. So that's lovely, and go for it. I'll leave that up there. You're all still texting. You need to get faster at the stuff. All right, cool, awesome. That's enough time on that slide. So the next thing that I would love it if you could do is tell someone something that you learned today. There's so much research to suggest that if you tell someone something that you learned, stuff that you go to, then that stuff sticks more for the long term in your brain. So think about, the most powerful thing that you learnt this morning. You've heard plenty of stories and learnings around how great companies innovate. So share one of those things at least with someone else. And finally, benchmark yourself. So obviously it's too late to enter the innovation list for this year. It'll be published on the 5th of December. But for next year, one of the things that we do for people that enter the awards is we actually benchmark you against all the other entrants, and you'll get an innovation audit report as part of going through the process. So we'd love to see some of you enter next year and benchmark yourself around how innovative your organisation is. So thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.